Welcome to, I think this is the sixth episode of Spilled Ink. So we're moving into month two. I've changed it up a little bit this week because instead of talking to people that I've known for 10 to 15 years, now we're talking 20 years. I think I met Greg Bishop back when I was a news assistant at the time for the first time. At least that's when we started to become friends. And Greg was covering high school sports, and I was trying to start covering high school sports. And so here we are now, 20 years later. Greg is currently working for Sports Illustrated, among many other side hustles. And Greg, how you doing?
Doing great, man. And I even got my hat on today, everybody. A little Mason Kelly action for you.
Appreciate it.
I'm doing great, other than you reminding me of how old we've gotten.
I know, I know. Talk about it. Like there are so perfect example of that. Michael Knight, who played for Bellevue when I was covering preps, and then played at UW when I was working for UW, is now the coach at Bellevue. And there's so many examples of that I do feel very old. And I think you're slightly older than me, so yeah.
Sadly, that is true. Yes.
So take me back. So I believe, if I remember this correctly, when you were working at the Times, there were still regional sections, and preps was a huge part of that. So you would have your coverage area, and you would have to own that.
Yeah, a little context I think might be helpful there. The first thing I'd say is I had a pretty big decision to make, at least just for me, in 2002. I was interning at the Newark Star Ledger. It was a really fun internship. I had 100 bylines in 15 weeks. They sent me all over the country, covered the NBA Finals, World Series, WNBA Finals. I mean, it was a really cool internship, but they were only offering to keep me on for like another month or two. So like you would take that job in essence to become part of the furniture, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, he's here. He's going to be here."
Mhm.
But I had met with Kathy Henkel, who was, as you know, the sports editor of the Seattle Times, while I was still a young, over exuberant college kid, and she had basically given me the idea that I would never work there. Is what I always like to joke, and it's sort of true. So basically, it was like, call me in 10 years when you've established a career. This is a destination paper. And then unexpectedly, when I was weighing that from the Star Ledger, she called and said she had a 6 month internship open. That became 3 years. That became full-time employment, and everything went from there. But as far as first jobs go, I'm really glad I chose the Seattle Times. I enjoyed working with Don Sheldon, and I think that kind of job is perfect for any young journalist. My first job was covering Washington women's basketball, the Seahawks, and every high school in Snohomish County. You're right in that we had a Snohomish County section of the paper. John De Leon, shout out right here, is necessary. And they let me loose. I was writing columns before I really had opinions. I could do fun, goofy stuff. I could cover games. What I loved about covering high school preps in this area is that it's the perfect training ground. Nobody's handing you any ideas. Nobody's giving you a big, thick packet of statistics at halftime. Nobody, is helping you at all. But in doing all that stuff, because nobody else is going to do it, you provide what I think is a very valuable service, which is informing people about their communities. And I don't want to get off my lawn here right at the bat, but like as we move into this content creation thing where all we want to see is people get hit in the nuts, I think that service in particular is more valuable than ever.
Mhm. A couple things on that. One, I agree, which is why we are here today. Two, if I remember correctly, when you were at the Star Ledger, didn't you write a story about Shaq? Wasn't that one of your like big things
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. In fact, his stepfather tried to choke me, if you want this. So basically, he had a biological father who you might remember, if only from Shaq's luminous rap career. There
Mhm.
was a song, Biological Don't Bother. And there's also the stepdad who's a Marine, and they call him Sarge, and probably not the right guy to land opposite when he's not happy with you specifically.
Mhm.
Anyway, I found the dad in a mission in Newark. I went and interviewed him. All the connections were wild. They had like the security guards that worked for Shaq had been with the local police force, which was run by the real dad's brother. I had 200 relatives in Newark. Talked to half of them. The other half, they're in the biological don't bother camp. And I finally got Sarge to sit down with me at a hotel in Secaucus. I'll never forget this. I use this story all the time when I was young and looked young, and people would say, "How are you going to do this?" Because I went to interview him. I cowardly saved the hardest question for the end. I wouldn't do that these days, in part because I think the flow should be more natural. But I said, "What? How will it feel to know that Joe is going to be there? Joe Tony, the biological father." And he got mad. I'm talking swearing. I'm talking hitting the table. I'm talking throwing my recorder against the wall. And I picked it up and drove back to the office. And I was kind of shaken. I'll be honest about that.
Mhm.
And I got a speeding ticket in the rain on the way over. I'll never forget this day. This is so long ago. And anyway, the recorder it didn't break. So of course I used it all. The language was a little inflammatory. I believe I said that expletives were flying from his mouth faster than the pieces of grilled cheese he had for lunch, which is one, overwritten, and two, unnecessarily unkind. And I thought that was it. And the next day I go in the office, they're all happy. I remember my editor telling me, you kicked Bill Plaschke's ass, which was maybe the greatest compliment I'd gotten at that point in my career. And then they go, "You want to go to the NBA Finals tomorrow?" I'm like, "Sure." Don't think anything of it. They give me all these weird assignments to do before the game. I know this is a long story, but I promise the payoff's great. And it's basically like talk to a toll booth guy at 16W on the turnpike, go to
Mhm.
Madison Square Garden, write about the sad fans. And my last one was to interview the official scorekeeper who had been there like 30 years. And so I'm talking to this guy and I feel a pair of hands around my neck and somebody's like down here like grabbing at me, and it was Sarge, and he didn't get too far. I wouldn't frame it as like I felt like my life was in danger, but it definitely startled me. And here's the really crazy part. We talk about relationships. I see this in the high school sports stuff all the time. People I dealt with before that come back into my life now. Jim Gray broke it up. They wrote about it in the New York Post. They said a New Jersey intern was chewed out at courtside. And 20 years later, I did Jim's book, Talking to Goats, and now we're business partners. So I guess it all started with high school sports in Snohomish County. There we go, tie it all back.
Well, and I mean, that's what this all is about, right? I think that whether it's the job market, journalism, anything, it's all about relationships and who, it's the reason why we're talking today, right? How have relationships benefited you throughout your career?
Well, I think with high school sports specifically, I'd say in a grander sense, like a wider sense, they taught me how to like cover something, how to research, how to organize, and how to call people, which I don't know if you're like me, but I know a lot of writers are. Like I hate talking on the phone. I get a lot of anxiety for my interviews. I have to tell myself self-help stuff like it's going to be over in 30 minutes either way. And so might as well go well instead of poorly. And that was really the first time I had to pick up the phone. And people used phones back in those days, like real office phones,
Mhm.
and call people all the time. And we both worked some for Don Shelton. And the best piece of advice he ever gave me was, the idea that everybody has a story. And I would hit every coach in every sport in that conference to ask for ideas. And then I'd make a big list from that. And, now I'm sitting here 23, God, years later. Jeez.
Yep.
And I do the same thing, but I can target the whole world,
Mhm.
and I think that stays with you in a larger sense. In a more specific one, I think it really helped me write about things that are hard to write about and ask questions that are hard to ask. High school, you look at any high school, especially in that conference in Snohomish County, and you're talking hundreds and hundreds of athletes. There's all kinds of stories to tell, and I tried to really mix what I did in terms of lighthearted versus powerful but hard to read. In terms of, at one point, I felt like I was writing too many tragedy stories up there, and they would even tease me about it in the office. And then I think that just, yeah, I would say relationships are 60% of what we do, and when I was that age, I would have said the writing was a lot more important, but I know better now.
And I think that's what brought me back. I think, throughout my life, high school sports keeps coming back into it. And that's the part that I love about it are the relationships that I built. And, I'm not gonna sit here and slam the Seattle Times. However, to your point, I wrote a lot of stories about kids battling cancer. And I had a really good one time. And I remember sitting in the A1 meeting and I told that, hey, and they're like, oh, well, we've had too many stories about cancer recently. And I'm like, dude, I I disagree. If it's a good story, it's a good story. It just so happens that this is what's happening. And so
Jeez.
no,
Yeah.
and I think that's my issue with the business sometimes is that it's not run about the people. And I think that's what makes me sad about the fact that high school sports aren't covered the way they used to be. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
No,
Uh,
no, but I have something there because I'm not going to slam into any entity I've worked for. And you're talking 25, 30 at this point
mhm,
ish, you know. But I just think we've had 7 different rounds of like new ownership at Sports Illustrated, and each time there's multiple layoffs within that. Like I know more people that have been laid off than I know that still work there.
mhm,
And every group comes in and they say how excited they are to have us and what our legacy is and why it matters in the world. And then they have the same plan to fix it that failed in 2010.
mhm,
And more filming stand-up of me on my phone in 20-degree weather outside the Bills Stadium is not going to draw new readership. I think what we've lost along the way, and by we, I don't even mean us, I mean collectively, the storytelling, especially I do a lot of documentaries now, and that space is docu-series or bust, and
mhm,
most often it's for bust. I just think we've lost we've lost our ability to really try and understand something. And for me, maybe this is too extending. I see the world in story, and I think we're as divided as we are right now, all over the place, strictly because people understand less about the world around them. They understand less about people that are different than them. All content related media just speaks to whatever you want yourself to be right about. Like
mhm,
that's not learning, that's just confirming, and it's doing it in a biased way. And I just think I hope there'll be a return sometime in our lifetime to where people just want to know the world better.
mhm. My thing that's always confused me. So when I talk to people out in the world, they say, we love it when you do this, right? And typically it's feel good story. It's not, who so and so beat so and so. It's this, it's the story that just happened the other day. Jamal Crawford coaches Rainier Beach because Mike Bethea is sick, right? And what a cool moment that is for these kids that get to play for him for that day. And those are the stories that people want to read, I think, but yet we keep going farther and farther from that. And there's, for some reason, it's a business decision, but I don't think, I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but it just doesn't seem like that
plane and didn't remember that she had lost it for like 2 months. And when I go to speak to classes, I tell them read anything. I don't care if it's People Magazine. I don't care if it's anime. Like it just needs to be whatever you're interested in because that'll draw you to more places. And yeah, I think you're spot on with that.
Well, and that's why people are, going to leaving legacy publications and going to Substack, right? Because that's your audience. And if you can get an audience to subscribe to you, then, they know what they're going to get. They don't want the other stuff. They just want that one specific thing. You
Yeah, and a couple examples, like I love John Canzano's, like everything in Oregon, and I don't care about Oregon Ducks football or whatever, but he's just so lasered on it and it has real reporting. Or like David Epstein, a former colleague and friend of mine, who smartly left SI Rogue Range and then became kind of a quasi-famous author. Like his Substack's amazing.
Mhm.
And I just think there's so many diverse examples of that. There's part of me that wonders, and I'm going to get a little cosmic here, if eventually I won't be like an on-demand writer. I've written voiceover for an insurance conference. It paid well. Like the people are coming in and there's a
Mhm.
voiceover to introduce them. I have written speeches for people that I work with. I have written TV scripts. I've written documentaries. Basically, pretty soon I'll be on the side of the freeway with a sign that says, "We'll write for food." But I think that there's no less of an appetite for words. The question is what those words are doing and why we're
Mhm.
looking at some of the stuff that I also find entertaining,
Mhm.
mindlessly so much more.
Mhm. Uh, so back to Snohomish County and preps locally. Who was your favorite coach to interview?
Oh, that's a good one. Mark Perry at Snohomish, he was the football coach, and he taught me a ton about football. The way they ran that wing tee. I guess I would throw Terry Ennis in there too. Now you got my brain going. Um, I covered the end of his entire tenure at Archbishop Murphy, and they were always good. He was always available. He taught me a lot about the sport too. I wish I didn't remember only football coaches, but that is what's coming to mind now. If somebody else jumps out, I will jump back in there.
Sounds good. Most talented athlete you covered there.
Talented, I'd probably say Ryan Appleby. He was the basketball player up at Stanwood, ended up going to Florida and UW. At the time I was covering him, he was considered, one of the best players and recruits in the country. And I always liked driving up there because, at 22, I hadn't seen nearly as much of the country or the world as I've seen at 45, sigh. But I like driving up there. You go all the way up and then you go in and through the forest. And I just remember games there felt so intense. I watched him play and I felt like watching a puppet master,
Mhm.
just the way he controlled the ball, the silky smooth jumper. I don't know. I hope he's happy. I haven't thought about him in a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned Ryan Appleby because my version of that is Brett Kingma, who played at Jackson and then went to Oregon for a while, and it was the same way. Like, in fact, people were upset with me because they thought that I was too tied into him, and mostly I just liked him. I liked talking to him, and he was an interesting cat. We actually did a video where we did a 3-point contest, and I kept it closer enough to like I think I made him a little bit nervous. And then at the state tournament, he was talking about how he like had his I think it was I can't remember his fingernails or his toenails painted pink, and I'll never forget. I got the one time I went on with John Clayton, and I said that story, and he was like, he could not wrap his mind around it, right? Like he was like, I don't care about this. Just give me he's like, I just wanted to know about what's happening at the state tournament, very basically, not that this interesting kid is, shooting threes and painting his toenails pink, right?
I think I
Uh,
remember that story actually. But
yeah.
that to me is the point, right? Like there is consumption for checking stuff off and making sure you know a little bit about everything in the world. I'm good with that if that's what you prefer. But there's so people always talk about death of Sports Illustrated, death of journalism. Like Yeah, I might not have a job at SI next month, next year, 10 years from now, whatever. But I don't get the sense that people don't want work that I remember your story 15, 20 years later,
Hmm.
Like there are people that want to be moved.
Hmm.
And part of my sell to people,
And so people still have a desire for this information. They just don't want to consume it the same way. And these big legacy entities don't know how to do, like, they just can't figure it out. And that they're not, I mean, yes, the New York Times still has cachet and they don't have, like, it's more the people, right? Like I go to
yeah.
watch MSNBC, I want to watch a certain person's show. If I want to read a story, I want to read this specific person. Content is the people, not the entities as much.
For sure. And I'd say I'm maybe more cautious or alarmed typically than I need to be, but there's a part of me that's been thinking for a long time that this may all be a la carte down the road, which
Hmm.
as a journalist who chases information but also does long stuff, it sounds like Lord of the Flies to me,
Hmm.
but I'm okay with that. I'm ready to march right in there. And I think you're seeing that all over TV. I'm working on a documentary right now, for instance, on this guy who takes athletes out of Cuba. I wrote about it for SI. Life Rights to Skydance, couldn't get it sold, pitched to everybody. But we're actually working with the group right now that does Kickstarter campaigns to fund films. And the
Hmm.
guy who runs it did the usual suspects. And
Oh,
like
wow.
it's become a very profitable way to get a film made. And then when you have the full product, you can do it. And my understanding, just in the couple calls we had with them, is that it's all moving that way in TV too, where you won't be paying for a bundle so much as like every single thing you watch, but less money.
Hmm.
So whenever I talk to young journalists or anybody, it's like you got to stay versatile. I certainly never thought I would be doing all the weird stuff that I'm doing now.
Hmm. And I think, based on what I know about you, for a lot of your career, it's not about Greg Bishop, the writer. It's about the story that you're telling. And I always said the same thing. I am a storyteller. I'm not the face of it. I don't need to sell myself. And now it's the opposite, right? You have to have a brand. You have to have an audience, which is why I do things like this to fuel that.
100%. And what I would say is that always felt to me like antithetical to my nature. And I think when I was younger, I probably framed it like, I don't need to do that. I'm gonna be capital writer, capital W writer. I'm gonna, march down these paths. And that's just a dumb way to think. I think now I see it more as fear,
Mhm.
and anxiety and like doing the job the way I do it. I think it's hard. I'm not asking for sympathy, but I write about people. I believe that character primarily is action. I don't care what a guy thinks he is, where he thinks he fits in his league, why he theoretically might be the best player at his position and anything. I think all that stuff is garbage. I want to write about what somebody did when they confronted something that will illuminate that thing for other people.
Mhm.
And I try to ground it. I think most NFL writers at this stage who are national is primarily a bunch of middle-aged white guys calling a bunch of middle-aged white guys and writing about the league. I've never done it that way. I've always tried to write from the player's perspective. And I think fans get it skewed, like these guys are making a couple million, so we don't have to have any sympathy for them. I actually think the opposite. I think it's incredibly complicated for that very reason. And I've had some hit misses like that, Adrian Peterson after the child abuse, but I've had some real hits too. And open the vein stuff from guys that don't normally do that. And I just yeah, I think that's the one. I keep lowering my standard, right?
Mhm.
Like it used to be like as long as I can still go to the events I want to go to and write the stories I want to write, I'll keep doing print journalism. And then it lowers to as long as I occasionally get to chase this feeling that sustained me for 2 decades plus, I'll continue to stay in print journalism. And then it became well, if I can, have a job writing for a print entity, I will take it. And then it became a real job, just like anything else. I've
Yeah.
worked in a factory, I've pulled boxes, I've done cleanup crew at Cheney Stadium. Now it's just like how I give my kids, braces and feed them every once in a while. And that's okay. But I really, really hope that my soul is not so jaded and battered by what the last 7, 8 years have been like. That like if I ever lose the standard of wanting to make whatever small impact I can in the wider world, I hope that that day I quit.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it's in some ways I feel like you're saying what I think every day. And I did quit. Like I did. I was like, I'm done, right? Like I need to go out and do something else in the world. And, I need to be a professional photographer at a, big school or, and the pandemic hit. I almost gave up photography altogether, thanks to Sam Reed at Seattle Prep. The athletic director there said, "Hey, do you want to do a photo shoot?" Been doing that for 5 years now, and it just keeps pulling me deeper and deeper. And I just these kids have great stories. The coaches have great stories. Even if Jason Kerr is gonna continue to yell at me, at some point next time I see him, uh, and
That's
that's
happened to me
okay.
before. I'm familiar with that calculus. He was always great to me too, even though he wasn't my zone, what we
Yeah.
used to call it. Yeah, and you know what? I don't mind doing this. I'm a middle-aged father these times, so I'm just gonna go full Hallmark card here. Like to me, that is the power of storytelling in whatever form it takes, however long it is, whatever depth it goes to. To me, a world without stories is not a world that I want to exist in.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. And that, I mean, to your point, to continue the Hallmark theme, I think the same thing when I read to my 7-year-old at night, right? And he's super into stories and he's into reading. And I think that I'm encouraged to see some of that stuff coming back, right? Like they closed the Barnes and
Yeah,
Noble in Issaquah and now they're opening another one. And I'm like, see, like there still is a market for these stories, even if they're trashy romance novels, right? Like
yeah.
people have changed the way they consume it, but they're still going to consume it.
Can I give you a funny aside there? It'll take
Yes.
30 seconds. Okay. You know my son Blake, he's 7. He's pretty much proficient at reading now, but we're working on comprehension. And part of his homework, he only gets homework for reading. And so we
Mhm.
do it every night, and I love it. But recently, I went to Kansas City and I did a cover story on Patrick Mahomes. And I thought it would be cool to see if he could read some of my work. And he did. And he got through a couple graphs, and then he goes, Daddy, these words are just really complicated. And I was like, no. Note to self, need to simplify.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Although give yourself some credit because 7 is still,
yeah.
there's a lot
I
of
wanted
words
to
to
be
be.
like, you're such a dummy, man. Start reading more, but no, as usual, all fault lies within. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, we could keep this conversation going on, and I know that you're a busy guy, so just want to say thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'd love to come on anytime.